Welcome everyone to this dialogue, which is on parallel economy or digital economy. Today we have the cryptocurrency boom that is happening, and there is a lot of confusion whether this is legal or illegal in many countries across the world. I remember in my university around 5 years ago asking my professor whether Bitcoin was legal, and it was the demonetization that had happened in India, and I was in London at LSE when I asked this question, and he was like, "It's not illegal." So it's quite it's a discussion that we ought to have in terms of what is legitimate in terms and how this entire economy of digital economy is getting regulated. For this discussion today, we have with us a panel of expert speaker. We have with us Mr. Mark Nuttall. Mr. Mark is he's joining us from Singapore. He's an anti-money laundering, political, and also counter-crime specialist. He was with the law enforcement international and also in the UK before, and this has been his specialization. We also have with us Mr. Ephraim Piercy Kinyanito. He is the public policy specialist, regulatory affairs specialist. He's basically a lawyer and he specializes in international trade, technology, media, and telecommunications law. He is associated with many international organizations. Thank you so much for joining us for this particular webinar. We first start with an opening statement. I would request you to make an opening statement, followed by a discussion session, and then the final comments. Over to you, Mr. Piercy.
Thank you so much. In my opening statement, I'd just like to highlight that the digital economy
I'm sorry.
Requires us to avoid that. You'll find that you'll find that the drafting documents for various trade laws at the international level did not take into account digital economy. So we have to think about how to incorporate this in a way that also gives revenue to governments, but does not also allow illegal things to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Mark. Your opening statement.
Yeah, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, as was rightly set out, I'm from a law enforcement background. I've dabbled in the world of cryptocurrency and the compliance aspects of them, and also the legislative background of how they sit at present. Obviously, each and every country has its own separate framework, its separate legislative protocols and its regulatory protocols. However, banking these days appear to operate on more of a regional and global basis, however, with separate legal entities within the relevant countries. This causes a problem because now that we have another commodity, which is a digital commodity, people are starting to scratch their heads and go, how can this be worth anything if it's digital? Well, in the first instance, people didn't think that paper was a good idea to move in terms of a currency. Used to be precious metals, used to be precious minerals, and precious stones. However, we've moved to paper, and in recent years we don't even have paper anymore. Guess what? It's digital. So why should an item that is on the blockchain be any different when it's on a secure chain? That's the point of the blockchain. You've got problems with the on-ramp and the off-ramp, but essentially that digital chain is something that can be watched from start to finish, except from the on-ramp and off-ramp, obviously. But for me, there's a bigger discussion to be had in relation to how blockchain is dealt with, how terminology is used when we talk about, in inverted commas, cryptocurrency. A lot of these cryptocurrencies aren't. They are tokens, they are securities, they are contracts, they are securitization. Some of them lock down elements of various different technological processes. So they're there for different reasons, and they have become speculative. However, that speculation should be dealt with, or could be dealt with, in a similar way as we currently deal with securities, trades, and commodities. So on my side, there's a lot of organizations and governments going to central bank digital currencies. That's the way that the world is going at the moment, whether we have a say in it or not, which we do not. And that's for compliance, due diligence, and transparency purposes. In a lot of countries, or some countries, that is being questioned as to how surveilled its citizens are, and other citizens from other countries, in terms of what that looks like. However, I think we will all find ourselves, certainly within the next 10, 15, 20 years, transacting on the blockchain.
Thank you, Mark. That was a great opening statement to start the wider discussion, which is on the legitimacy, also on the regulation aspect. I would like to come to Mr. Ephraim. Mr. Ephraim, if you could, we see that today internationally, there has not, at least we are not aware of any kind of activities in terms of legitimizing cryptocurrency, and also having a dialogue on that in the United Nations, for that matter. Many countries, they are legitimizing it, and for valid reasons. I would like to hear from you on what you think is what has been done in normalizing the use of digital and crypto payment in international trade.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just wanted to add that and say that building onto that, that at the international level, there is the World Trade Organization, which has two major documents. One is the GATT, its General Agreement on Trades and Tariffs, which was drafted in 1947, which looks at goods, trading in goods, which is based on that. And then there's a 1995 General Agreement on Trade in Services. So those two documents. So there are two schools of thoughts in terms of regulation of cryptocurrency at the international level. And this has happened in various countries. So some countries are regulating it as a service, as a financial service, using the terminologies which are similar to the terminologies found in the 1995 WTO document GATS, while others are regulating it similar to what Mark talked about, as a good, as something speculative, as something that can be moved and it can be traded between persons. So those are the two different schools of thought. So, for example, looking at the United States and Japan, which have been at the forefront compared to many other countries, and China, you'll see how they trade. It's more towards services than goods, but it's a mixture of both, the school of thought. But at the international level, there's no general agreement on it. Various countries have various laws on how to deal with it. With my part of the world where I'm originally from, for Kenya and South Africa, Nigeria, and other places, you'll note that in Africa, there are regulators who have banned any interaction with digital currencies, while others are slowly embracing, especially over the last 5 years. Some who had banned, for example, Kenya had banned, but over the last 2 weeks, they are starting to think of how to incorporate it. Similar to Nigeria, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, they had discouraged the use of cryptocurrency, but then over the last 1 year, they want to come up with a national currency, the central bank. So that's how it's being done. So those two schools of thought. So we are yet to come to an agreement on how to deal with this, but not just this, but also just the issue of e-commerce. There's no general agreement at the international level now to deal with e-commerce at the WTO or United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Whereas at the African level, there's two documents, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which was agreed by around 35 governments that talks about trade and trade in services and trade in goods, and the Africa Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection, which also talks about e-commerce and defines what e-commerce is at that level. So that's the landscape generally, but it's good to look at how this conversation will evolve in a way that does not stifle innovation, because total outright ban or sometimes looking at it only trading it in regulating it in a way that is limited, it will stifle innovation, and there's so much potential in the use of e-commerce, and not just e-commerce, but also cryptocurrency and digital currencies online. Thank you. You're on mute, sorry.
Sorry. Yes, thank you, Mr. Ephraim. That was Mr. Mark. As a follow-up of this particular question, what are the challenges facing law enforcement currently? Because we find that it's highly unregulated, the sector, and does the asymmetry in this role have in this landscape have any role to play in terms of geopolitics and geopolitical analysis?
Yes, and it's a multifaceted question. So when we look at regions and we look at national legislation and we look at certain jurisdictions, say here in Singapore, there's the Payment Services Act, which allows digital asset vendors to be able to operate. So here in Singapore, we got organizations like Gemini, for example, who can freely offer tokens for sale, absolutely no problem. Same with Coinbase. Binance is having a little bit of problem here, but as long as you have the license that's authorized by the Monetary Authority of Singapore here, they're quite happy for you to be able to purchase those tokens, coins, securities, whatever you want to call them this week. I think the main key on this is education, understanding what it is, understanding what the consumer is purchasing, understanding what the flow of it is, because if it's in a custodian's hands, i.e. Gemini or one of the others, then you can't see where it's been. It's for then Gemini to be able to see what that blockchain address is of that certain token or coin or bits of coin or whatever the case might be. So you don't have access to that if you've got a custodian looking after your savings or your assets or your securities or whatever you want to term it this week. Up in Hong Kong, for example, they look at them as securities and futures rather than tokenizations or speculative currency. And they're looking at it a little bit differently in that at present, there is no act in place if it's not deemed to be a security. So if it's deemed to be a coin, etc., it's an unregulated sector. At the moment, that's changing. Should be changing next year. However, if it is a security, then it falls under the Securities and Futures Act, I think. Down in Singapore, we'll come back again, they are redrafting the Payment Services Act to enact an Omnibus Act as well, which will cover elements of the grey parts of what is missing out of the legislative functions. But this side of the world, some of the central part of the world, maybe not the West, but certainly these elements are starting to some of these countries are starting to press the button in terms of central bank digital currencies, and are starting to be more open in terms of what it brings to an economy to have these speculative assets in the hands of both retail consumers and investment consumers. So they are quite happy being able to draft that legislation as long as they're abiding by the Fataf travel rule that's in place at present. So as we all know with Fataf, they just bring out recommendations. They're not really rules. People speak about them as rules, governance, doctrine, but it's not. It's just a general recommendation. So the travel rule, and I'll use that phrase because it's the well-known one, just essentially means that once it comes into a country, you've got to know where it's been beforehand. And that's basically it. It's more complex than that, worded in a different way, but that's essentially what it means, is that actually you need to know where it's been if you're going to have it within your jurisdiction, which is where these custodians come in. Because before, as we all know, 10 years ago, if you were going to grab a Bitcoin off the internet, then you typically either mine it or buy it from a salubrious location and keep it within your personal wallet on your laptop or in a USB key. Well, that's not quite the same anymore. There are so many custodians out there and so many blockchain analytical companies like Chainalysis, or the other one, what's the other one? Elliptic, etc. They're actually keeping a peg watch on this. And I think what speaks volumes is that MasterCard have just purchased CipherTrace. CipherTrace was one of the bigger blockchain analytical companies. For MasterCard to purchase that organization, not just as an M&A, but as an integral part of its network, then that speaks volumes as to where we are going in terms of currency. What we've got to factor in, though, is, right, what countries are going to be financially excluded from this because they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the sea cables into country, etc. They can't even, they're barely on a dial-up service in some countries, certainly within the Pacific region. And within Africa as well, and Efren can speak to this, is that, you might have a technical infrastructure that's being influenced at the moment and placed in via some of the other nations that are assisting with that process. But again, where are you going to be if your country, your nation, or the world moves to blockchain, and your country, your nation is left behind, and you're left with stones, metals, or cash? Where's that going to go to? Or, is this going to be a competition with fiat, or is fiat going to form the bedrock, with blockchain being the main vehicle, as gold and silver were, and paper then was, which is now fiat? So there's lots of questions that are circulating at the moment, which is why plenty of governments are getting into a bit of a panic about these things, which they don't need to at the moment, because most people don't understand what this is. Plenty of the criminal fraternity are like the rest of us. What is this? What's going on? It's only really the financial enablers that really have a linchpin on this and understand where to place assets, as they would have done with watches, cars, houses, trusts, brokerage deals, etc. You need those financial enablers. The majority of people that are within the volume element of criminality are still working on fiat, still working cash is still king for them. So this at the moment is still in its, what I would probably term, to early to mid stages. The legislation is being drafted. The geopolitical platform is working its machinery. It's just that now, in this current age that we are in, every piece of information is 24/7. So everybody's getting access to, and if they want to look it up, they can look it up, but it's in your face all the time. So whether you go onto Instagram, whether you go onto Facebook, whether you read the news, etc., there's a term that pops up every now and again. And so if we look at the NFT market, the non-fungible token market, for example, in the art world, that's again another process. And people have problems with that as well, because a lot of people, normal people, the people with the majority of the pot, can't afford the gas fees. So they're not going to buy a piece of digital art that they can never extract from the vendor. So if you go on OpenSea, for example, and you even take one of the free pieces of art that's on there, you still need to pay the gas fees. How many normal people are going to do that? How many normal criminals are going to do that? Because they've got to convert that from fiat in the first place to a token to then purchase art. People are lazy inherently. They're not going to want to do that in the volume that we're talking about. When we move on through this process, yes, it will become a different world. And Coinbase are looking at opening up NFTs on their platform pretty soon. But again, it's about the price of the gas that's on there, and that's another topic altogether. So that's my input on that little question that you offered.
Mark, as a follow-up to this particular question, I would like to ask you, what's the role of transaction cost? Because transaction cost drastically reduces. In terms of, I mean, this is something to look into, and I would like to hear from you whether you have any thoughts on the transaction cost and whether that can actually be used.
Yeah, so transaction costs in terms of gas fees depends on the currency. So when I talk about gas fees, that's a transaction fee. It's the same thing. It's about mining. If it's a coin that can be mined or a token that can be mined, and when I say mined, not in the typical sense, but in a digital sense. And then if you've got a token that isn't a mined token, but it's purchasable, it's a contract, it's a security, then what you've got then is a different art. You've got if you're using a custodian, you've got a card transaction fee, you've got a custodian transaction fee, if you will, kind of a storage fee. And then when you come to sell at a later date, if you wish to sell, if you want to use it as an asset, then at that point, you have also got other fees as well. So again, card fees, transaction fees, monetary fees are a little less than some, if you're going to send money via SWIFT, etc., dependent on what the currency rate is, and also dependent on what the item is as well. So you've got these elements to bear in mind. Again, when we're talking about NFTs and things, you've got to swap that fiat for the token to then purchase the NFT in the first place. So you've got a three-stage transaction process then that costs money, tokens, whatever you want to name it. So say if I wanted to sell one of the NFTs that I have personally, it'd actually cost about $40 to $50 to sell that NFT if I wanted to sell that NFT, and that's US dollars. How many people have $50 US hanging around that are generalized as being normal working people? Not that many, just to sell an item. And if it's a low value item, say that value item is going to go for $2, it's still going to cost you the gas fee of $50 to sell it. So you're making an extensive loss on it. What will change is when we come to, so there's an organization over in the US, it's called Flexa, and they're kind of a payment rail. So what they're doing is utilizing a payment rail the same as Visa or MasterCard was, with collateral sat there to weigh and balance the transaction and to also counterbalance any double payments or any fraud that occurs. And what they do there is that the transaction fee is on top of the vendor. So it's like when you use your credit card, debit card at a retailer, that's where the transaction fee comes in. It's a lower transaction fee, much lower transaction fee than utilizing the normal card system. So Amex, I think, is typically about 14%. Visa and MasterCard, I think it's 3.5%, etc. These guys are like in the decimal places for it. So that's when you will have a change. It's when people start to adopt this as something that can be spent and people can understand what the value of it is. If you look at Bitcoin at the moment, it's up and down, it's all over the place. You can't gauge if it's going to be 40,000 one minute or 70 the next. So on that basis, people are unwilling to part with their asset because it's going up and down. So only those that are willing to take the risk versus the reward, or the reward versus the risk, are the people that are actually spending these elements, or people that have different tokens. So if they've got a lesser value token that's kind of stable in a way, that's just moving up and down in the decimal points, they're willing to spend it because they know what that's going to look like. So if you look at something like, people have been banding about that silly meme coin, which is Dogecoin. Well, it's at roughly about 20 cents. So, you know that that's going to sit there, and as a general member of the public, you've invested in it a little bit. Okay, you now want to spend it because you want to go and buy a shirt or a pair of trousers or whatever. So there's all these elements that are in place at the moment that are being discussed at a geopolitical and a national level to say, how can we look after our citizens at the same time as not as ensuring that their freedoms are upheld because it's a speculative act. It's just that knowledge element that people need to understand and get. What do you think on that, Ephraim?
I totally agree. Actually, just to echo the points about the cost of access when it comes to countries, especially my part of the world, where only, let's say, between 25 to 30% of people are connected to the internet. So that's the first hurdle that we need to get over from, especially sub-Saharan Africa. That's a very big hurdle. So some parts will be left behind when it comes to digital trade. Some of you might know, I follow a lot of negotiations at the WTO and the UN. And 2019, there was an attempt by a group of 90 countries, most of them the developed countries. They wanted to come up with negotiations on e-commerce. Sorry, there's background noise, as I mentioned, being in the airport. So they wanted to come up with negotiations on e-commerce, which were pushed back by African countries. They wanted us to remain the way we are for the moment as we wait for more development. But then, are we lagging behind the rest of the world by us not negotiating e-commerce at the international level, at the World Trade Organization, or not? So these are some of the things. Yes, we need to advance. We can't keep dragging the world behind for them to wait for us. So governments at the regional level need to do more when it comes to connecting more people, getting more people involved, so that we don't keep having the excuse of we are only 25 to 30% connected in terms of population wise, that we need to slow down and not have a negotiation in place at the international level when it comes to e-commerce. So this is something which is concerning, but just the cost of access. So that the ones we first bit before even talking about regulating cryptocurrency, whether as a good or as a service, we need to agree on e-commerce, the definition of e-commerce at the international level and the standard.
Thank you, Ephraim. I would like to touch upon just one. Actually, I would like to come to you for one question, which is on the role of International Trade Center. Because recently, in fact, the past 4 years, there have been a lot of activities in terms of e-commerce and in the area of e-commerce and facilitation of international trade by the International Trade Center, which is also a UN body. If you can just touch upon the role and the developments in that area.
Thank you so much. So the role of the ITC are similar to the role of UNCTAD, similar to the role of UNDOC. They all collaborate with the World Trade Organization, which is the ultimate body when it comes to trade issues. The World Trade Organization has like all the various systems in place. It's been there since 1947, since the GATT, and it's the ultimate body. So it's all these other bodies, all these other institutions, they serve as part of the ecosystem to support the WTO in its role and in its work in various capacities. For example, UNDOC with security issues, working with law enforcement, with ITC with research and support and stakeholder and capacity building. UNCTAD similar, the UN Conference on Trade and Development. So it's all this support ecosystem, but the main bodies are the for international trade law. We would really rely on the WTO as the main authoritative body, and that's where there is need to reform the GATT and the GATS. So the 1947 GATS document and the 1995 GATS document, they need to be revised to take into account some of this. And that's why we really need to move towards negotiations on e-commerce. If, for example, just going back to the whole African example, if in Africa there's an agreement at the regional level on what e-commerce is, but then at the international level, we are dragging the world behind and saying we need them to wait for us. That's something which we need to work on and build on further and stop dragging the rest of the world behind. Well, at the regional level, we are almost agreed. We almost have like laws in place. Almost half of Africa has laws on e-commerce, cybersecurity, and data protection in place. So this is something which is important, despite, yes, only 25 to 30% of the population being connected. So just noting down, yes, all these institutions support these two main treaties, GATT and GATS in place. So yes, clear.
Thank you, Ephraim. Also touching upon the aspect of cryptocurrency and what's happening at the World Trade Center, the World Trade Organization in terms of the trade war. I mean, in terms of technology, we have seen a lot of disputes in the past. In terms of negotiation, what is your view on this, and how we can how do you see the future in terms of technology and negotiation at an international level?
I see the future. I see us moving from as I mentioned, 2019, there was that conversation by the 90 countries that want us to have a treaty. But then I see us moving, and I see that negotiation happening, especially with this happened right before the pandemic. With the pandemic and what has happened, as I mentioned, some countries have started changing some of their stance that they had earlier. For example, Kenya was totally against cryptocurrency. Right now, it's embracing it. Over the last 2 weeks, Nigeria, similar sentiment. So slowly, the pandemic has changed a lot of things. Things are not as they were before. So I see governments, even those who were opposed to e-commerce and cryptocurrency and taking it as a wild west, will slowly find ways to balance and regulate the industry. So we just need to find that sweet spot, sweet balance that does not violate people's rights, but also allows people to engage in a way that they are able to exercise their rights to associate and their rights to transact online and offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Ephraim. Mark, I would like to come to you on who has the control and the regulation currently with the asymmetry that we are seeing today. Also, what I would also like to touch upon is that when you mentioned like most of the population, they cannot afford technology and blockchain, Bitcoin, and all that we are talking about. So how do we make our approach more people focused rather than more policy focused? Like what do we do in terms of reaching out to the people and creating stability?
I'll answer the last part first, in that anybody that is an early adopter, no matter what this is, and that item becomes successful, then they are the ones that are going to make the money. It's as simple as that. And when we get into later stages and an adoption of whatever becomes global, that's when things start to change. The change will be central bank digital currencies. They will be fixed. They will be at a certain rate. It will be the digital yen. It will be the digital Singaporean dollar, etc., whatever they want to name it or call it. But that is definitely happening. The digital yen is in process. That's why they've kicked cryptocurrencies out of the door, because the competition basis of that is that'd just be ludicrous. So what they're doing is setting the digital yen first, which they will then allow in due course, I expect, not saying that they will, but I expect them then to allow in digital currencies in due course, so that at least you've got an asset tradable market with some digital currencies occurring in other countries around the region that might be held by some Chinese entrepreneurs, for example. So if you look at somewhere like Vietnam, for an example, where you have got a very low paid and economically viable environment for cryptocurrency, actually it's one of the largest trading countries in cryptocurrency. That money that's being spent on that cryptocurrency isn't coming from Vietnam. So you've got a high turnover of cryptocurrency for the future. People understand that digital assets are the future, no matter if we like them or not, and that the central bank digital currencies are coming. Now, yes, some countries will be left behind, as I stated earlier, and Ephraim confirmed, in the wake of this, but it was the same with paper. It was the same with transactions that were digitally enabled in banks. So here in Singapore, I can utilize my card, use what's called PayWave, and spend $50,000 on it, for example, via PayWave. Transact to somewhere like the UK, I can only spend on my touch card 30 sterling, i.e. 30 Great British pounds. The disparity between those two is massive, and it's the same rails that it goes under. It's the MasterCard, Visa card, Swift rails that it goes over. So the levels of fraud are equidistant to each other. So you've always got a level of disparity in countries and with individuals and with class-based or tierage-based or familial-based or caste-based systems within those countries. And there will be people left behind. But as ever, they will be, I expect, stampled on by the haste to move forward and to evolve. And like we have in some other countries where we have either hawala systems or we have informal trade systems, lend and loan systems, bartering systems, etc., they will still remain. It's just that we're now moving on to a different tier of how we transact money, in what way, for what transactional cost, and how quickly. Because that's the things for the banks. The financial institutions, if you're making a swift payment, for example, sometimes that can be weeks, dependent on what you're purchasing. If you're purchasing a house, for example, that transaction can take weeks to take place because of the swift messaging that has to take place in between and the confirmation of those swift messages. If you're doing a credit note within a bank, for example, and you're working in the trades department, you have got to do all the confirmation of how that trade's taking place, what the shipping costs are. Is it worth it to give this organization a credit note? If it's already on the blockchain and you've got a central bank digital currency backing that up, you know that that's not going to be missed. You know that there's going to be a limited amount of fraud occurring on that network. work, and that limited amounts of money, which is from an unlawful purpose, are going to be enacting within there, because that shows up then as separate lines of chain. So this is the process. We are moving towards a different system. We are moving towards a more surveilled system. We are moving towards, at the same time, a more transparent system. So in that, when we look at individuals that can't afford the technology, don't have access to the technology, don't have access to the broadband, etc., then we've got to then look at who is going to come in and finance that infrastructure stream. Now, that is occurring at the moment, and it's occurring by various nations that have disagreements with each other. So you look, as Efren quite rightly stated, within some of the African nations, guess what? It's either the US or it's China. So you've got an option. They will give you broadband through underwater cables that will then be ripped up through the relevant countries on their way through, and they will give you the relevant infrastructure. But there's always a price to pay for that. So these things are happening, they are occurring, and technology is increasing. It's just that there are a lot of governance questions at a higher level to be discussed. In answer to your first part of the question, overarching governance, there is none. Fataf are a membership organisation. Interpol are a membership organisation. The United Nations are separate, are an organisation that is made up of many, many, many components. And in that, there is a lot, it is a bureaucracy by definition. And there is no way that the United Nations, apart from certain ratification measures, can really force a nation to do something, because that nation is sovereign, and that goes against the United Nations stance on things. So two heads collide on that. So you look at North Korea, for an example. North Korea can do what it wants within its borders. Nobody's going in to crush North Korea, no matter what the outside world says about North Korea. What's really going on in that country, who knows, apart from the individuals that have either escaped from it or been in it as part of a media exposition. So there are a load of elements here that say quite clearly, this technology is here. People are utilizing it as asset security, and in some instances currency, because it is being spent. People are purchasing with it. So as I stated earlier, that organization Flexer, that is actually in Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts and all these organizations over in the US. So people are spending their currency, in inverted commas, within those locations. So there is the means to do it. There are people that are doing it, and we are moving to central bank digital currency. But as with anything in the world, there is no central governance. There is just recommendations and membership organizations for either countries, agencies within countries, or alternatively, political will. So you look at Fataf, as I was stating, that is a membership organization that can only give recommendations. There are only a limited amount of Fataf countries that are actually in Fataf anyway. So then there are Fataf style regional bodies that Fataf acknowledges as being kind of within their respectable recommendation portfolio. So actually Fataf doesn't implement anything. It doesn't, it has no governance. The mutual evaluations that occur are exactly that. They are mutual with the country. They are evaluations to say, are you meeting the recommendations that we've placed out on a general tone? Yes or no. That's why they have a qualification list. Some countries like to deal with countries that are green. some countries will actually deal with countries that are grey on grey listing, etc. So there, for me, with the way that it's going at the moment, it is going towards digital. It is going to central banks, and the gas fees will lower in due course when technology gets better. Because like I say, it's being spent at the moment anyway. So, and there's no governance over that. They're just following the national protocols within America, for example, to be able to spend, and that's meeting the compliance, KYC, due diligence, and the BSA as well, and various other acts over in the US.
Thank you, Mark. That was actually, this discussion is quite intriguing because there are many questions that have come up, and but Ephraim, I think he has to leave. So if you can just make your final comment. And there was one question, maybe we can discuss this later, which is on the export import of encryption technologies, which is the thing behind blockchain, and also that governs trade. Ephraim, if you could just make your concluding statement, and we will follow up later in the coming days.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry. Yeah, I have to go and board. So I just building on to what you said with Mark earlier, that we are going digital. We have to accept that, and the only way around it is just to ensure that we are not coming up with restrictive laws that restrict, and also lowering the fees to ensure that people are able to engage and able to experiment with the technology, even if regulation.
Thank you, Ephraim. It was nice having you, and I look forward to dialogue with you at the coming days. I hope we can cover many more things. Thank you.
Good luck on your flight, Ephraim.
So, Mark, coming to you, in the just wanting to understand your perspective on the export import of encryption technology, which is what is behind blockchain and the digital currency, and this also, I think this is also behind the trade wars that's happening at the WTO. And I wanted to actually ask this to Ephraim, but I think we can follow up. What's your take on this?
Yeah, so encryption technology as a standard anyway is trademark typically. It's IP related. So say for the majority of what I'm working on at the moment, say if I open up a website on Safari and I get that certificate that qualifies me to be able to make a payment on that website through the relevant system, that is IP marked. And it's the same process for each of the currencies that are on the relevant blockchain, whether it be Ethereum, whether it be Bitcoin, whether it be the EFC that's coming up soon or not. This is it's the secret sauce behind these organizations' processes, and with digital currency or the blockchain was firstly initial to be able to handle contracts. That was the point of blockchain. And then what occurred was that somebody thought it'd be a good idea, and that somebody is supposed to be Japanese, but who knows? Somebody thought it'd be a good idea to see what happens if you have a number of ever diminishing items which could hold a value. And this is where all this started, is that if you can have a digital piece of something and it becomes rarer and rarer, like gold, silver, rubies, diamonds, etc., and you made that digital, then you have a commodity. And that was the point of it. It was trying to show that why are gold and diamonds important. You know, it was kind of that theory, is if I can do it in a quantifiable chain and show where it's come from and how it's subdivided and then make it ever diminishing, then that increases the value of it. In terms of encryption technologies, that's the point of the blockchain, is that it's a process from end to end that is transparent and visible. So if I went onto the Ethereum blockchain today to look at an address, pretend that I don't have items in Gemini and I have them in a wallet, then I know what that address is. I can look at that address to make sure that everything is fine on that chain. And that's exactly what organizations like Chainalysis, Elliptic, and the other ones are currently doing for other organizations to ensure compliance and due diligence.
Thank you, Mark. That was, in fact, this discussion was, it was quite intriguing, and it's something that will go on and on, I feel, because it's something which has many facets, a lot of country perspective, national perspective as well. And I would also say a technical perspective here, because right now we are teaching something called as the secure shell, for the IT professionals, and it's all about developing their own shell code.
Yeah.
And that can easily be done in terms of encryption. However, there is the regulatory aspect as well, which requires technical plus legal knowledge and it to go together. So I think this was a very nice discussion, and I would like, if there's any comments or anything that you have in mind regarding this.
Just, is there any comments or questions from the audience? Because there's, you know, they've been sat listening to me witter on. I'm just wondering, and Ephraim, just wondering if they've got any questions.
No, there are no questions from the audience, but I would like to request the audience if they would just type any question that they have from this discussion.
No. Nobody's put the hand up. No, I mean for me, as I've stated, this is the future. Oh, somebody's put the hand up. So Proma.
Yes, Proma.
She's on mute. Her mic's on mute.
Yeah. Proma, you can unmute yourself and you can just ask your question.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is an interesting discussion, and I personally don't come from a background that everything makes a lot of sense to me. But listening in as a person who would be part of a larger economy in terms of a user, what kind of timeline is the world looking at in terms of when, you know, the money in our wallet is not going to mean much and it's all going to be cryptocurrency? Is there something that the analysts speculate on in the next 10 years, 15 years, everything's going to be digital?
Depends on your jurisdiction. And it depends on how much emphasis your certain jurisdiction puts on the rest of the jurisdictions. So if you're looking, say, China's the next 5 to 10 years, if not sooner. Everything, when I've been to China previously, everything was through WePay or the WeChat service. The majority of individuals weren't carrying around cash. It was digitally transacted. Even for things like toll gates, etc., it was digital transactions. So it depends how quickly your certain national infrastructure is going to go to central bank digital currency, because that'll be the start block for this. Is that you'll have a little Bluetooth checker, or you'll have it on your phone if that's the relevant piece of kit in your country, and it'll be a touch system. to the same as people can use cards at the moment on things like PayWave or Now Touch or one of those other systems. And that's where we're going to. So instead of having it in a notated format, it will move to the chain instead. And in terms of timeframes, say that you're living in a so India. I think India's been quite clear in that at the moment it wants to be relatively sensitive to standard fiat and to standard commodities as well, because obviously India is highly rich in commodity. So whether you're talking about gemstones, precious wealth, precious minerals, metals, etc., and it wants to maintain that. Whereas if you start to move to a digital-based economy and digital starts to be the one that weighs it instead of a commodity, you've got an unequal purchase. So there's a lot of countries in the world at the moment where you've got high natural resource that actually don't want to move to a digital currency for that particular purpose. So loads of geopolitical things in play there. But as pressure mounts and the world goes on to digital blockchain rails, they will have to move. They will be forced to move. They might be behind the post a little bit, but the implementation of blockchain is already there. It's not like implementing the SWIFT network, for example, that is very highly technically laborious and very expensive to implement for financial institutions. And for central banks as well. This is easy stuff for them to implement. It's not difficult. It's just moving to it and establishing the infrastructure for it for normal everyday consumers.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anything? I think we have not got any questions. I think, Mark, any final comment, anything you have?
No, not from me. I think I've talked enough. But thank you very, very much for listening to me. Thank
you so much for accepting this invitation. And also, this will be telecasted, it will be webcasted on YouTube on Sunday, and also on other social media platforms, so that everybody can have access to it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And again, it's been a pleasure. Have a good evening.
You too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.